I chased my dreams and lost my family. I always thought I had time to make the right choices, to change my life for the better, to not make mistakes. It was a belief I lived by for many years. It seemed that there was a whole eternity ahead, and all important decisions could be postponed for later. After all, tomorrow would definitely be a new day, a new opportunity, a new beginning. How naive I was. It all started the day I was offered a job abroad. This moment became a turning point in my life, although at that time I did not realize how much it would affect my path. The offer came unexpectedly, as if out of nowhere, and at first I couldn't believe my luck. This job was the realization of a dream I had been striving for years, to go abroad. It was more than just a change of residence. For me, it meant opening the door to another world, full of new opportunities and unexplored horizons. A world where everything is different, where people live differently, where you can start from scratch. I have long dreamed of such a chance, of leaving behind everything that was weighing me down here and starting a new chapter of my life. Imagine this. Every morning you wake up in an unfamiliar city, full of sounds and smells you've never heard before. You go to your new job, where interesting challenges await you and coworkers with whom you will have to build relationships. Every day brings something new. Every minute you learn something that was previously beyond your comprehension. When I first heard the proposal, my head filled with vivid images. I saw myself walking the streets of an unfamiliar city, getting to know the locals, trying exotic cuisine, learning the culture and traditions of a new place. I imagined meeting sunrises over unknown landscapes, discovering new horizons, becoming a part of something bigger than I was before. Everything seemed so simple and clear, as if it was enough just to agree, pack my bags, and set out for new adventures. No one told me about the possible difficulties. No one warned me about how much pain and loss such a step could bring. At that time, I did not know that accepting this offer would be the beginning of a long journey, full of trials and hard choices. The question arose, what about my family, my wife, my children? They also want a better future. And then I faced a hard choice. Should I take them with me or leave them here in the familiar surroundings until I settled down in a new place? At first I thought it would be easy. After all, we'd be able to see each other often via video link, and I'd be able to fly home every few months. We'll keep in touch, share news, discuss future plans. Isn't that the best option? Leaving them in the comfort and security of their home, letting them continue their normal lives while I set up housekeeping in a new place. But the more I thought about it, the clearer one simple fact became. A family is not just a collection of people living under one roof. A family is about connections, emotions, shared experiences. Can these bonds be preserved through a computer screen? Can rare meetings replace daily closeness, joint overcoming of difficulties, joy from small victories? The longer I thought about it, the more I realized that this choice could have a profound impact on our family. Change is inevitable, and it can be painful. The kids are used to their surroundings, their friends, their school. My wife is attached to her home, her hometown, the people she interacts with every day. Can I deprive them of all this for the sake of my ambition? Wouldn't that destroy our relationship, create an unbridgeable chasm between us? Every thought, every argument made me doubt. On the one hand, I wanted a better future for all of us, but on the other hand, I wasn't sure I was ready to sacrifice the warmth and comfort of our family life for an uncertain future. My wife insisted on staying at home. Her arguments seemed logical. The children had to finish the school year. She didn't want to leave her parents alone, and in general, moving was stressful. I understood her fears, but deep down I felt that if we didn't take the opportunity now, we might miss the chance for a better life. In the end, I made the decision to go alone. It wasn't easy, but I tried to convince myself that it was temporary. I promised my wife that I would be back soon, that everything would be fine. I even began to believe in my own words, trying to drown out the inner voice that whispered that nothing good would come of it. The first few months did prove to be hard. Work consumed almost all of my time. I would get up early in the morning and come back late at night, tired and drained. The pay was good, though, and I comforted myself with the thought that I was doing it for our common goal. I sent money home, bought gifts for the kids, and tried to show that taking care of my family was my top priority. Gradually, I began to get used to the new place. The city, which at first seemed alien and cold, gradually revealed its secrets. I found my favorite cafes, parks, stores. I made new acquaintances, began to participate in local life. Sometimes I even felt like I was gaining the freedom I had long dreamed of. But every time I called home, the feeling of joy was replaced by anxiety. Every conversation with my wife became shorter and more formal. At first, it was the usual trifles. She complained of fatigue, of problems with the children, of lack of time. Then the conversations became infrequent, and then they became short messages. The children, too, began to drift away. Their voices sounded indifferent, they were rarely interested in my affairs. I felt an invisible but palpable gap growing between us. We stopped sharing important events, emotions, thoughts. More and more often, I caught myself that I was living my life and they were living theirs. And although outwardly everything remained in place, inside I felt that our family was beginning to disintegrate. A year passed, and one evening when I got home after another long day at work, I saw a notification on my phone screen. It was a message from my wife. Opening it, I felt my heart clench with a premonition of trouble. She wrote that she was filing for divorce. These words hit me like a thunderbolt. I reread the message several times, not believing my eyes. She said she no longer believed in our future together, that she was tired of waiting for me to come back, tired of hoping that I'd come home someday and everything would go back to the way it was. The pain pierced through me. I sat staring at the screen and couldn't believe this was really happening. I remembered all the promises I'd made to her, all the hopes I'd harbored. But now it was all crumbling like a house of cards. It pained me to read those words, but I knew it was all my own fault. I had let work and ambition overshadow what was most important to me, my family. I'd left them alone, thinking I could handle it, that I could hold all the threads of our life together in my hands. But instead, I severed those threads, leaving my wife and children alone with their problems. With every word she wrote, I felt the last drops of trust and love that still remained between us strain away. She no longer believed in me, no longer believed we could be happy together, and I couldn't blame her for that. I had created this situation, brought it on myself, and now she had made up her mind to take this step. That night I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what had happened. I realized that I had lost not just my wife, but the foundation that had kept me afloat all these years. Without her, without our family, I was left alone and lost in this vast world. After my divorce, I was left alone in a foreign country. Everything that seemed important and meaningful suddenly lost all meaning. The money I was making was no longer satisfying. The work that had once been a source of pride became a mere chore. The new friends I was spending time with couldn't fill the void left by the people closest to me. I realized that I had made the wrong choice. Instead of appreciating what I had, I chased the illusion of a better life. I had sacrificed the most important thing, my family, for my ambition. Now I have nothing but memories of how happy our lives could have been if I had done things differently. Day after day, I faced loneliness. I often wondered how things might have turned out if I had chosen a different path. If I had stayed by their side, supporting them and helping them cope with difficulties. Perhaps we could have overcome all the obstacles together, become even closer to each other. But now it's just a fruitless fantasy. Now I have no family, no home, no feelings that used to fill my life. All that's left is the pain of realizing that I myself have destroyed what I spent years building. And although I continue to live, work, and see friends, inside I feel devastated. Every day reminds me of the choices I made and the fact that it's impossible to get back what I've lost. Sometimes I think I could go back and make things right. If I had the opportunity to live that moment over again, I would probably do things differently. I would have found a way to combine the desire to move forward with the need to stay close to those I love. But the past can't be changed, and now I just have to live with that hard choice. Every day I think back to the night I decided to leave without them. I remember how I sat in silence, weighing the pros and cons, how I tried to convince myself that this temporary separation would do us good in the future. But now I see that I was wrong. I have lost the most precious thing I had, the love and support of my loved ones.
My father abused me as a child and now he needs my help. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. My father, a man of strict principles, believed that physical punishment was an integral part of parenting. He was not a raging drunk or a violent man, but it was normal for him to punish me when, in his opinion, I did something wrong. In his mind, such methods were character building. At my 15, I already knew I needed to find an answer. Questions had long been building up inside me like a ball of threads, tangled and pulling toward one point, my father. Why could the man I thought was my protector, the one who was supposed to be my most reliable bulwark, be so cruel to me? I could not keep silent any longer. The incomprehension tormented me from the inside. Every day, waking up thinking about how it was that love could turn into pain, I asked myself the same questions. How could you hurt someone you supposedly loved so much? And then one day, gathering all my resolve, I approached him. The words stuck in my throat, but I forced myself to speak. Why? I asked quietly, looking him straight in the eye. His gaze was cold, without a hint of remorse. He answered simply, "It's how I teach you." The words came out of the blue. I stood before him, stunned. The realization that this was all just part of his strange parenting methodology weighed heavily on me. The realization was more painful than any physical punishment. It was clear to me that I had never been a real daughter to him. Instead, I had become an object for his cruel pedagogical experiments. My soul, which had recently longed for love and warmth, now felt empty. It seemed to me that the whole world around me was collapsing, leaving only a cold reality where even the closest people could be strangers. The beginning of the mold. One day, I brought in a failing grade. My transcript had more or less a good grade on it. I thought it was a good result. But the memory of my father telling me to bring a belt still makes my cheekbones pucker. I used to obediently follow him without any resistance, but that day I refused. Daring to ask why he was beating me for mistakes, was he being punished at work for lack of diligence? Surprise, shock and anger mixed in his facial expression at that moment. He was beating me with extreme cruelty that day, and I felt pain and hatred towards him once again. "So I'd know how to open my mouth at my father," he said, not noticing that I was just defending myself, trying to understand why things had turned out so badly. From that time on, fear became an integral part of my life. I didn't just fear, I looked for ways to avoid confronting it. I tried to act right, to be what he wanted me to be. But inside me burned a desire to be rid of this tyranny. Often he liked to taunt me by saying that he should beat me on Saturdays, too, so that I wouldn't spoil myself. It was these words that made me reflect on my life, and questions arose about how long this could go on. By the time I turned 24, I was still staying at my father's house, carefully hiding my true feelings. I had learned to disguise myself, posing as that proper daughter he dreamed of. Every morning when I left the house, I would banish thoughts of who I really was, hiding my true self under a layer of artificially created perfection. I knew I had to conform to the rules my father had set, but at the same time, I felt like I was living in a parallel reality, full of fear and depression. Every time I returned to my house after school or work, I was truly terrified, anticipating that he would be waiting for me again, ready to teach me another lesson. Why am I remembering all this again now, in my 40s and 50s? I became my own person, started a family with a loving husband and 2 adorable children, and found a good job. I tried to pattern my life, climbing out of the dark shadows of childhood horrors. But just a month ago, disaster struck. My father had a stroke, and everything changed dramatically. My mother, panicked and distraught, insisted that I come home and help her clean up her room. She wanted me to move in with them and take over the care of my father, who was now partially paralyzed. Considering that she herself is not young and unable to cope with his physical needs, she felt it was exactly my responsibility. She didn't realize how difficult it would be for me to accept her demands. All those years spent in fear and depression came over me again like a relentless flood. My mother kept reminding me with conviction that I had to support our family, but I knew it wasn't just a demand. It meant that I would once again have to immerse myself in the dark memories of my childhood that I was trying to escape from. Every time she called me ungrateful, I felt fear rise up in me, clutching my throat. Thinking about having to live under the same roof with the father who had once punished me so cruelly, I felt my body stiffen with terror. The realization that he wouldn't even be able to hurt me physically was no comfort. Just having him around and remembering him was enough to revive the horrible images of my childhood. I tried to block out my emotions, but now they were creeping back to the surface like tidal water. After all, the only thing I could do for my father was to make sure he had a decent place to live in a nursing home. That was all I could do. I couldn't be there for him, and while it was easy to talk about my situation, it was actually riddled with complexities and invisible scars that left blackness in my soul and life. My mother kept calling, and her screams seemed like an incessant storm from which it was impossible to escape. She rebuked me for being willing to give up on my father. Phrases about how I would look him in the eye, or that someday my own children would leave me in a nursing home, were heard constantly. I asked questions about the substance of the case, but got no answers, hanging up the phone each time, feeling the dark thoughts engulf me once again. I'll never forget how I just wanted someone to come and protect me when things were bad. She reminded me how they fed and clothed me, but what was behind those words I could only guess. We lived on a small farm with a vegetable garden, where I worked as much as the adults, doing my chores. Now, I needed medical services and treatment, which cost a lot of money. What did my parents give me? The ability to have an existential terror of men. I love my husband. He is a kind and gentle man, and has no idea how I flinch whenever he raises his voice. Not because he's angry, but just because he dropped something and expressed his displeasure. I jump up on the spot, each time expecting to be hit again. Every movement, every action is filled with fear. I feel my body tense up, preparing for another blow. My brain is working at full speed, going over possible reasons. Maybe I forgot to lock the door? Or maybe I left a stain on the floor. These thoughts flash one after another, like frames of an old movie playing in fast forward. I try to recall every detail of my day, analyzing where I might have made a mistake. But no matter how hard I try, there's no answer. Because it's not about what I did wrong at all. It's that this fear has become an integral part of my life. This habit of always looking for a reason to punish me, like a tiny worm that has settled deep in my mind, does not want to go away. Even years later, when I am a grown woman, these moments keep coming back to me in the form of memories that are impossible to get rid of. They stay with me like wounds that won't heal, reminding me of a past that I want to forget. Despite long hours of talking to psychologists, trying to understand myself through books and meditation, this anxiety doesn't go away. The pills help to dull the sensations a little, but they can't erase the memories that are forever imprinted in my mind. Although my father is no longer able to lift a spoon, his physical limitations don't lessen the inner tension I regularly feel. I still fear that he may reappear in my life, and all the horror I had sincerely hoped to put behind me may return. At the same time, I feel bitter and hurt that as I delve deeper into my thoughts, I realize that the image of a father who could have supported me through difficult times is missing. I had gotten used to not having that father who was there for me, who would hug and encourage me if I came to him with my problems. When I found out that my father had been transferred to a nursing home after being discharged from the hospital, I set up an automatic payment through a banking app to care for him. My presence was not required. My mother continued to call, repeating her threats that I could turn her into, and also insinuating that she wasn't going to help me with my children if I ever asked her for help. Involuntarily, I burst out laughing nervously, because they weren't really that helpful. They didn't have the time. Sometimes they took the kids in when they didn't have to go to class and didn't need to be watched. Every time I look at my children, I ask myself the question, can I break this cycle of violence and fear? Can love replace the lack that I myself have experienced throughout my life? I try to be the mother I never had, but the fear stays with me. If you are raising a child and you are convinced that I was beaten and I grew up normal, know this, it is a delusion. Being normal does not mean being indifferent to the suffering of others. You can either grow up to be a monster like my father or a broken person like I became. Maybe true strength lies not in continuing to live by old habits, but in changing them.